Hello, Global Theater. My name is Gerry Fialka. Today's March 28, 2025. Want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast, I'm Probably Wrong About Everything. Also want to thank Carolyn Casey for introducing me to, this is part 2 with Michael Stocker. Where are you calling in from, Michael?
We would say West Marin in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area.
Yeah, we covered a lot. We covered a lot in part 1, November 29th of last year, 2024. And one thing so much really impressed me in what you taught me was when I asked you the best thing for a human being, you said gratitude. So all I can say is right back at you, gratitude for being the writer you are, the musician, and the ocean conservatory, head, person, like really helping raise awareness on the oceans and the waters. And we kind of left off on the Peru have 9 senses. We sort of know of these 5 senses: sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch. And I did a little research and I couldn't find exactly the other 4 the Peru were adding, and I think one of them you said was the stomach. Do you want me to list all these ones I came up with, or do you know the other 4 that Peru adds to the?
Well, this is the Quero Indian folks, and they're an interesting group of people because when the Spaniards came to slaughter and pillage, these guys just went up into the Andes, and the Spaniards didn't think there was anything to live off of up there, and they were up there for a long time. And then in the, I think, late 80s or so, they started realizing that they were going to have to come down and share their wisdom to help to provide ways of getting us out of this big mess we got ourselves into.
Yeah.
And, so the other senses that they have, and there are other other indigenous groups that have other senses too, and there's some equivalencies. Melodoma Somé, I think, was talking about 9 senses of her people as well. But the Cusco is really instead. I mean, we Westerners, the seat of our senses is our head.
Yeah.
And we synthesize things cerebrally. The seat of the senses for the Quero is the belly, the Cusco, and that's why the belly came up, and that's why Cusco is called Cusco, Peru, because it's really the center of the center of the universe, center of everything, and they all have this kind of analogy in their own bodies. But there are other senses like the shadow, which is what happens with the juxtaposition of yourself between the sun or the moon and the earth. They're very honest pivot points, or so it kind of gives people a sense. And I know that the Egyptians, also in the Egyptian Book of the Dead, they talk a little bit about the same thing. And one of the things that they have is the name. And this is not the name in the sense that my name is Michael. It's a name that is a name of of how we sense it, and so they have these names that really clarify that. I know that, for example, in some of the Egyptian hieroglyphs, they have this passage to the land of the dead, and there's an interesting illustration of somebody's heart being weighed on a balance beam, and the other side of this beam is a feather. And so if you have a light heart, it helps you pass to the afterworld. And the same thing with the name. I mean, you might not know your name. You should try to know it as part of the practice, but the gods want you to enter into the afterworld. So they'll say, it's 2 syllables, rhymes with, they'll do these charades to try to get you to get your name. I don't know if the name figures into the Gero or the Maldomasames tribal affiliations, but they're just ways of perceiving the self that are very real, and they don't equivocate about it. Everybody who has got these perceptions doesn't say, well, it reminds me actually more of a duck with a long beak. It's all pretty much they recognize it. So part of, I think, would be knowing where you are in this pantheon
Yeah.
of sensuality.
That's beautiful. Knowing where you are. That reminds me of Carl Andre, the sculptor, because you talked about architecture and really enlightened me in that regard. Because Carl Andres said sculpture as place. And then in pulling that to just the place, but the building, Winston Churchill said, we shape our buildings, then they shape us. And
Yeah.
McLuhan updated it and said, we shape our tools, then they shape us. So just this search for self in, space and place, like you talked about place. So I guess, I'm going all over the place, but I guess the next question is perception reality?
Well, to the perceiver, of course.
Yeah.
But what inferred with our five senses centered in the cerebrum is that we're missing parts of it. Stuff we don't quite grasp, and
Yeah.
so.
Well, let's jump back into music, because that's, Thelonious Monk said music is math. And I'm curious how you integrate when you're composing, when you're playing Copland's four elements: melody, harmony, rhythm, and tone color. Though, how do you integrate, or what do you focus more on? But even before you do, what would you how would you describe tone color to the normal person on the street, not in academic terms? What is tone color?
Well, what we was talking about is the sound of a trumpet versus a clarinet versus and if you're a wind player, you have a certain amount of latitude with tone color.
Yeah.
A vibraphone, that's what you get. Well, you can use different mallets and things like
Yeah.
that, or harder or softer, but you don't have the kind of latitude that John Coltrane had, for example, with his saxophone, or Archie Shepp, or Arnie Lawrence, or these guys who are really broad saxophone players, who play not just notes.
Yeah.
They play textures, they play fabric, and so
I like that. Go ahead.
yeah, but the other stuff. I'm an arranger as well, so what you want to do is try to get your voices together to come up with sounds that are fresh. There's a standard, jazz big bands are just typical 17-piece big bands, and you have ranks of saxophones and trumpets and trombones and things like that, and they all add to this what's a characteristic tone of a big band. But then you get somebody like Gil Evans, who just was masterful in terms of his ability to be able to, have a bass clarinet and a harp playing together, or a bass clarinet and a muted trumpet, that would give a tone that you've never heard before, and he continued to do that.
Yeah.
I think everybody has, probably not everybody, but most people, his most famous piece was the orchestration for Sketches of Spain, what he did with Miles Davis, and that album, I'm sure it's still selling. I'm sure that the Davis estate is still getting money for it, but Gil Evans got a $500 arranging fee for that.
Oh my, I never knew that. That's amazing. Because Gil is one of those guys. Still keeping in mind this question about how do you these voices, melody, harmony, rhythm, and tone color. You know, I think Sun Ra and George Russell and Frank Zappa and Gil Evans, they knew how to have someone take a solo and the band's comping, right? Okay,
Yeah.
but they arranged, and you couldn't tell if the solo was written, or how do you arrange it so that the solo and the arrangement are going, you know, in a sort of Mobius strip, in sort of supporting each other. And it's not just, oh, here's the rhythm section comping, and now the soloist is going to do their thing.
Well, I mean, most traditional jazz is in a pretty, it's like a 32 bar or 16 bar phrase.
Yeah.
You know, blues has got 12 bars, but there's also 16 bar versions of that, whatever. What guys like Sun Ra would do is a whole different thing. I mean, he did an album in 1957, 58 called Sun Song.
Yeah.
And I was listening to that with my brother. I started listening to jazz when I was like 13 years old. So I was, 1968, 67, 68. We're listening to Sun Song, and he had this. Um, the larger form was a countable form that was easy, but he had these trumpets. They were muted trumpets, just going da 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 da, and blowing through this 32 bar phrase. And so the 32 bars is, that's when you do your solo, and you have an AAB or ABA form, and you know where your solos are, you know the chords you're playing, whatever. But this little trumpet comp in the background, my brother and I were listening to this, and all of a sudden I realized, God, he was doing this in a cycle of 7 in a piece that was 4/4. It was like, why, and it's slowly slipping, away and then back into sync, and then finally at the top, they came to the shout chorus, and it was, that was Sun Ra. He would just do that kind of stuff.
Well, that's what I mean is John Gilmore. I mean, he had an effect on Train, and Marshall Allen's still leading that band. He's 100 years old.
Yeah.
That it is hard, because you think, did he write that solo? And I mean, it's like Mingus with Eric Dolphy too. These guys, it seems as though that, you kind of get the gist of what I'm saying. But how do you know, just personally for Michael, melody, harmony, rhythm, and tone color, does one stand out more? Do you focus on one more than the other when you're playing your piano or when you're doing arrangements? How do you integrate those 4 elements?
Well, when you're really playing music, ultimately, hopefully you're not thinking about it. That but when you're practicing music, you say, I got these many bars to fill. I want to be able to move through these particular tonal centers, and you practice it and you practice it and practice it, and finally, when you get to a point you're on stage, you don't think about it anymore. You just go. And so this is one of, the last time I played in a bar was a local bar here, and it was it was a big thing. There were a lot of people there that wanted to hear the band, and there was a jazz band. My brother, who's a fine sax player, was visiting, so he was part of the featured thing, and I was playing vibraphone. We had a piano player, and but it's in this bar, and people are talking and stuff like that, and then I'm in the middle of like just really trying to listen intently to what the bass player is playing, or comping him, and all of a sudden, hey Billy, God, that's the last time I play in a bar. It's just, you can't,
I heard Pharoah Sanders in one of the oldest jazz clubs in the world, Baker's Keyboard Lounge in Detroit, and we were smoking opium, and the dude's playing right in front of our face, and all of a sudden the bartender turns the blender on to make a drink, and it was like, oh my God, I know exactly what you're saying. But this is funny, Michael, because my friend says the 3 T's of music are technique, theory, and taste. Technique, you've learned how to play an instrument. Theory, you know the structures. How does one acquire taste?
Well, that's the innate part, hopefully. I when I moved to Los Angeles many years ago, I put an advertisement out for musicians to play music with. That was back in 1981 or something like that. And I got this guy. I'll just call him John for right now. He's a guitar player, and we jammed, and this guy could play a lot of notes, but literally, I fell asleep while he was doing a solo. It was that bad. He was saying a lot of nothing,
Yeah.
And then I moved up here in the Bay Area in '87, and I put another ad out, and who should answer was this guy John again, and I said, well, maybe the guy has learned something, And so it's the same thing. The guy just, I mean, he was playing all the notes. He's playing all the right notes. He just was not behind them. I don't know how he managed to not fall asleep while he was practicing himself. It was really so.
Well, that's funny. You say in it's an innate quality. Some people say you acquired taste through exposure, but the word taste goes back to your thing with Peru. In the belly, your stomach, your taste buds somehow gravitates you towards, Archie Shepp in Train rather than these other saxophonists. You have your preferences. And so this is another quote by McLuhan in regards to that word taste. I'm curious, Michael, your reaction. He said, song is slowed down speech. The reason cultures have different musical tastes is ultimately connected to language difference.
Well, I mean, that informs music. But I mean, I think like gamelan music is really interesting. It's not really reflected in their language. It's a structural thing. But then again, I don't know how to speak the language. I just hear it as sounds. Perhaps it is structured that way. Maybe it is that their sentences are nestled like Ukrainian dolls or something like that. I don't know how their language actually.
Oh, that's interesting. Ukrainian dolls, because that's the tuba. I like to bring up tuba throat singers or the Bulgarian women's choir.
Yeah.
That is amazing music, and I don't need to know what they're singing about. Or a better example is when the Brazilian music craze hit America. Were we really knowing what the words were saying? It felt romantic,
Yeah.
The bossa nova say, yeah.
Well, I mean, the other side of that is that, when I was a kid, I didn't really listen to rock and roll. I was listening to jazz pretty early on. I moved from classical to jazz, but Bob Dylan was a brilliant writer, and it was a craze back then. But I was just hearing the music, and it's hard for me to hear lyrics when I hear music. So I was telling a friend of mine, back 20, 30 years ago, I was saying, Bob Dylan, I mean, it's just, it's pretty straight chords and a guy singing, and he says, don't listen to the music, listen to the words. I had to sit down and just reassess with this guy, Bob Dylan, and realize, music was not his strong suit. He played with good musicians, but it was not his. Yeah.
Well,
but
what's more?
Have a hard time listening to the words.
I'm the same way. But what's more fundamental, language or music?
Oh, music.
Yeah.
I mean, and it informs. I mean, I think one of the reasons why I was able to figure out how to write was because of music. And when I write, it's musical. It has cadence to it. It breathes, and that's why people can read it. It's hard, I should say. It's not hard, but it's a different discipline to write a scientific paper. Although I do the same, I get caught in the cadence of that as well. And I think one of the reasons why people can read the technical stuff that I write is because I still have some kind of cadence in it, which makes it readable.
What's another word for cadence, Michael?
It's balance and rhythm.
Balance and rhythm. Yeah, thank you. So, tell me an instrumental that makes you laugh.
Oh God. I'm going to have to think of that for a minute, but I heard McCoy Tyner play down in Los Angeles one time, and McCoy is just, he was an amazing player. He just completely rolled back the frontiers on the piano and stuff like that. And he was playing, and he had everybody in the palm of his hand, and he was playing, it wasn't a ballad, it wasn't a sad tune, but everybody in the audience was crying.
Wow.
He just knew how to move people around. It was so amazing. I don't funny, humorous piece of music. I can't think of anything right now.
Well, that's all right, Michael, because you have ESP. The next question is exactly that. Ruth Draper said the key is to bring the audience up onto the stage and into the scene with you. It is they who must give you even more than you give them in the way of imagination and creative power. I mean, you just laid that out, what McCoy did. How do you do that? I mean, Ruth's formula sounds good, but how do you bring the audience up into the stage? I mean, not so much in the situation that you talked about earlier, where in the bar they're all talking and socializing, but I mean, you're in a situation where you're playing music and people are listening. How do you bring them up onto the stage? How do you engage them?
I think if you have a really tight musical ensemble, or you have a lot of integrity, that people will naturally go there. But one of the things, I've played in front of large audiences before, large for me being 5,000 or 10,000 people, and I can't sleep for a couple of days afterwards. It's intense.
Wow.
Becoming the channel of all that energy. And when I was working with the big rock and roll bands, like Kiss or Blue Oyster Cult or these guys, we'd have these stadiums where there's like 50,000 people in the stadium ready to hear it. And before that, because I was a tech, I had access to fix stuff up. And I would go out in the front skirt of the stage and just stand there and say, could I handle this energy? Because you're channeling all that energy. The people are there. And I think one of the reasons why the backstage behavior was so radical, in terms of people just trying to put the fire out by drinking or cocaine or sex or whatever else that they were doing. They try to, because it gets so jacked up with all that human energy, all that,
Again, you anticipated. This is Leonard Cohen. The only way you can sell a concert is if you put yourself at risk. And if you don't do that, people know. What role does risk play in your creative process?
Well, I mean, I think one of the more dynamic illustrations of this was, I was playing a concert a few years back. My brother also was there, and we were just going through tunes, and we didn't have any rehearsal. And I knew most of the stuff because I'd written most of the stuff, but my brother put a piece in front of me which we'd not rehearsed, and I had not read it before, and I'd not heard it before. I mean, I knew it was a follow, and I was playing vibraphone. And my biggest worry was that I was going to, hit the wrong note, something, clam it. And I was introducing this piece, and I mean, my line wasn't written, but I'm basically looking at the form and saying, how am I going to embellish this particular form as an introduction to the rest of the piece? I was mildly terrified. And what was beautiful about that is that I executed it well. But the fact that I was like, oh shit, was the thing that actually made the whole thing dynamic. It really brought it
dynamic, right? And then the audience senses that. But there's a key underneath this, Michael. You're so brilliant. You're concise and articulate. I appreciate this. Is what is courage? What does courage mean to you? Did that take courage? What was the underlying, like you said, energy that enabled you to do that?
Well, I was there on stage. I'm not going to run out the back door. I had to do it. It did,
But I
it
mean,
did.
what's your courage? I mean, it took courage. Would you say it took courage?
It took
What's
courage.
that rooted in? Where does the courage come from?
Well, I mean, hopefully it comes from the fact that I have been playing long enough that I know that the pathway is available to me. I mean,
Yeah,
if I'd been the first time I'd played vibraphone, I wouldn't have gone through that whole experience, and it would have sounded crappy, probably. I mean,
yeah,
there might have been an accident, but I mean, one of the things that it did is that because of the emotional dynamics of the thing, that made the whole piece gel. So everybody was like, you know, and it was literally after the piece, we had a sax player playing with us, Steve Deutsch, really really great player. But we finished the tune, and it was one of those things where you could hear a pin drop in the room because people were going, "Whoa, what just happened there?" And Steve said, "I
yeah.
guess we're done. We don't need to do it." Yeah, but
See, yeah, that's that sort of thing that you create with the audience. The whole purpose and ritual of music is that it's a live event. Like Tom Waits nailed it. He said, um, "The best music doesn't want to be recorded." The whole beauty of music is that it's a live event. But I know recording music changed music. But here's another one in that regard of what you just talked about. I'm glad you gave a specific because this is Viola Spolin. This woman, she was a social worker in Chicago who used role playing exercises to kind of invent comedy improv. So she spawned Second City, The Groundlings, Saturday Night Live. Her
wow.
line is, if the audience cannot see your struggle to achieve something, they cannot root for you to achieve it. What role does struggle play in your?
That's an interesting observation. But
Yeah,
I mean, so the first how I got into music, into listening to jazz, is I went to England when I was 13 years old, 12, 13 years old, and my family went there with my family. My brother Paul. My brother Lee was in Vietnam at the time, but he had developed this relation. He left behind a really amazing collection of jazz albums, and he said to us, be careful of these, but listen to them, and
yeah,
but he also gave us a painting he wanted to have delivered to this guy Michael Gibbs. Michael Gibbs is an orchestrator who did a lot of and writer, and he did a lot of work with Gary Burton, but he also orchestrated behind Joni Mitchell, Hejira, and other stuff. Really amazing. Anyways, he took me and my brother Paul under his wing, and took us to Ronnie Scott's club to listen to jazz. And the first band that I heard there was a Tony Williams Lifetime, and it was Tony Williams on drums. It was John McLaughlin on guitar,
oh my,
and Larry Young on organ, and these guys took the top of my head off. I mean, and it was amazing. And John McLaughlin at that time was before the Mahavishnu thing. He was a cigarette in his mouth, bent over his Fender Mustang, and just ripping the crap out of this guitar. And I said, if music can do that, I'm done with Haydn piano sonatas. I'm just not going to go there anymore. And
I remember listening to that Lifetime album in college, and it did exactly that. It ripped my head off and like opened up new horizons. But your brother Paul is the saxophonist.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
What a treat that Michael Gibbs took you to see Lifetime. That is amazing.
Oh, it was amazing. But to continue the story, so John McLaughlin kind of cleans up his act a little bit. He gets a lot more concise. He stops smoking and does the whole kind of religious thing.
Yeah.
And so maybe it was 20 years later, I saw him at the Hollywood Bowl with the Mahavishnu Orchestra.
Yeah.
And I mean, these guys, Billy Cobham and Ron Lair, and these guys, they, as Frank Zappa said about McLaughlin, it's the only guy who can play a guitar like a machine gun. And it was so precise, and it had
Yeah.
absolutely no risk to it at all. I literally fell asleep. Listen to this. It was,
Oh my God, no risk.
yeah,
That
no
is,
risk. There you go.
Michael, that is amazing, because I interviewed Napoleon Murphy Brock, who's from the Bay Area, who sang some of the on the greatest Zappa albums. When I asked him that question by Leonard Cohen, I says, "What role does risk play in your creative process?" He says, "I leave it in the dressing room." So that's like knowing he presented. Most people go, "Oh, I use risk," and that's what it's all about. But he was the first person to ever say, "I leave it in the dressing room," because what I think he's saying is, I have a role to play as a musician in performing this music, and I want to feel confident that I know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And so that was interesting that you said that that McLaughlin put. Yeah, that is funny. I love that. My
Well,
Vishnu had a,
Zappa is very precise. I mean, you really have to play
yeah.
his music. And you probably heard of the Black Page that
Oh yeah.
when you rehearse, when he was hiring musicians, he put this page in front of you. They had all
Yeah.
just the oh, incidentals and wacky, and
Yeah.
if you could read that, you got the gig.
Yeah. No, I worked for Frank for 10 years, and it's
Oh, really?
amazing because that's the thing about Napoleon saying, "I leave risk in the," he and Frank knew that Napoleon was such an improviser and so quick on his feet that he would leave these parts in the song where they would just improvise babble, verbal babble between them. And then they had to be on top of their feet to do this. And Napoleon invented this great line that I've repeated for 30, 40 years in the middle of one of Frank's songs on Roxy. And he goes, "Nothing is what I want." And he goes, and Frank goes, "That's a true Zen saying, nothing is what I want," which is an epitome of all this, psychology. I wanted to stay on Frank for a second because in 1969, the LA Free Press asked him about Pauline Oliveros working with sound above the audible and below, creating a mass. And Frank said, not that it created a mass, it created something audible. It produced a sum indifference tone, which happened to be located within the audible frequency range. So by combining something so high you couldn't hear it and so low you couldn't hear it, it yields something in the middle you could hear. Whether you like it or not is another question. The concept is brilliant. Can you suss out what Frank's saying there about that creating a mass, something so high and so low in the middle?
Yeah, well, the physics is pretty simple of this. I mean, if you play a single note on the piano, you hear the fundamental, but you also hear a series of overtones. You hear the octave, the fifth, the third, the fourth, the third, so forth. And so when you play a chord, all those different notes play with each other, and you have both summational and differential overtones and through tones that are basically mathematical. If you play A440 and C525, you're going to hear the sum of those two. I'm not going to bring my calculator out at the moment, but you also hear the difference. So the difference tones between 440 and 252 is it's below both of those notes, so you'll hear that.
Yeah, that you said 440. What's the other number? 252.
Yeah, 252 is a middle C.
Yeah, 252. Yeah, amazing. Because I'm curious, why is 4/4 time the most commonly used time signature in Western music?
That's symmetrical. I like what Eldridge Cleaver said about disco. He said, the white music is all about ones and threes, and black music is all about twos and fours. But disco music brings them all together. It's all 1, 2, and 3 and 4.
Oh my God! Wait, disco is 1 and 3. Black is 2.
Disco's every beat, and so there's music that plays the upbeat, and well, actually, that's the kind of cowboy music. I guess it's 2 and 4, and then 1 and 3 is the kind of the downbeat stuff, and you mix them all together, and you basically have something everybody can dance to.
This is amazing, Michael, because I've just entered this question into my script, and I'm going to read you a little thing about 4/4 music, and you tell me what you think. Mm-hmm. When I say, why is 4/4 time the most commonly used time signature in Western music? Someone said, besides being intuitive and easy, it might be because it's in sync with walking or marching. It's called our heartbeat rhythm. So Captain Beefheart varied from what he called the mama heartbeat. He said, the 4/4 mama heartbeat is related to fascism. It's so fixative and hypnotic that it's dangerous to the heart. It makes the heart beat faster. And so he wanted to create non-hypnotic music to break you out of that catatonic state. So a couple things there. Is walking in 4/4 time? Is heartbeat in 4/4 time?
Well, it's kind of a cadence, but it's not in 4/4. I wouldn't say that. But walking is symmetrical. You got 2 feet.
Yeah.
I think if we had 3 feet, we'd probably have more music at 6/8. But the waltzes, waltzes are a way of breaking up that symmetry. It's a grace. And I have a friend, Mariah Parker. She's a really fabulous musician and plays. She's got an ensemble called the Indo-Latin Jazz Ensemble, and she's actually working with Paul McCandless. Has been working with him for about 20 years now. Probably, maybe the last albums that he's going to play on. He's getting old. He's in his 80s, and he's getting a little frail. But she studied East Indian music, and so she can do these things that sound natural to her in 17. Or she's got pieces in 10 or 7. She's got a kind of a samba in 5, and it sounds natural. It sounds workable, and there's you get accustomed to it, and it's the way you kind of work the lyricism over it. But what I always found interesting is that there's not a lot of pieces in 9.
Yeah,
because it's really hard to navigate. And but anyway, she's these interesting rhythms that she integrates. It's Latin sounding music with East Indian rhythms in it.
I definitely want to look her up. And so you fell out a little there. I didn't hear you. What do you think heartbeat is in? What time is our heartbeat in?
Oh, this is interesting. I studied West African percussion, and I got to at a pretty high level. I was playing with some African ensembles at one point. This is back in the 90s, and we had this kind of masterclass, percussion masterclass taught by this guy Samba No, and the guy was a Nigerian, just a stunning drummer, and there was all these musicians, and we're trying to get this cycle together, and one of the musicians said, well, where's the 1 on this? Where's the 1? And Samba chose the weirdest place for the 1 to be. It was not a downbeat. It was like, whoa, what's that? And then I realized what the question was. He knew it was important for Western musicians to know this thing called the 1, but for him, the 1 was when he was born.
Oh my God!
Yeah, so it was a totally abstract concept for him, and yeah, so that's how he dealt with it. So what rhythm is a heartbeat in? 1.
Yeah.
Fortunately, it goes on for a long time, because when you get out of that, when you lose that one, it's the end.
This is really amazing because the guy I interviewed a couple days ago, Ben Manikin, look up his YouTube film called "Who Killed Jazz." Amazing musician. You guys have probably crossed paths at some point. We talked about this on the one, and I said that's funny because George Clinton in Parliament Funkadelic has a song, "Everything is on the One." and and Frank Zappa, in the middle of one of his songs, he says, "Yeah, I'll have the percussionist Ed Mann call up the drummer Vinny Colaiuta and say, and show him where one is."
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, but I love that. Where's the one? It's where when I was born.
yeah. It was wild.
I can't wait to tell Ben that. That is amazing. We covered the same ground. Well, Michael, here is a music writer, Ben Ratliff. He said, "I mean sound as it has long functioned among jazz players, as a mystical term of art, as in every musician finally needs a sound, a full and sensible embodiment of their artistic personality, such that it can be heard at best in a single note." So me and you could hear Miles and we'll go, "Oh, that's Miles." And
Yeah,
what Ben did was summarize that in two words. Miles is fragile and pointed. Coltrane is slightly undercooked and urgent. If a music writer was going to sum up Michael's sound that you respected and he got what you're after, what you're doing with music, what two words would you be satisfied with?
frightened and confused.
Frightened and confused.
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard for people to, I meet people who are musicians and I say, what kind of music you play? And a lot of people can't classify it. They can't tell. They just say it's just music, and
Yeah.
so I say, well, I'm a jazz musician, so I'm formed by jazz, but I'm writing stuff that doesn't really fit in the jazz canon right now. And it's but I also, I have it because I play a lot of instruments, and that's the other thing about it. If I was just a sax player or just a flute player, something like that, I mean, you can hear people who know how to basically articulate those instruments. When you say Coltrane, it's an instrument you have a lot of latitude, tonal latitude on. What was like amazing, you mentioned Pharoah Sanders. What amazed me is I heard Sanders playing with Coltrane, and he was just ripping apart. And I didn't hear them live. I heard the records they did together. And when I heard Sanders play live, I was blown away. He plays so quietly. He's got so much control, and he plays so quietly. It's just completely. I didn't expect that. I thought he was going to be ripping it apart, and he's just unbelievably delicate.
Well, is that when someone does that? Because again, you anticipate the next question. Is that called dynamics? So, in other words, what role does silence and not playing enter in your composing and playing music? In other words, how do you know when not to play?
Well, that's all part of the lyricism. I mean, the silence is just as important as the notes are. But I think that was the issue with this guy John that I spoke about. He was just ripping notes out, and and he didn't think about what was between the notes. He didn't breathe.
Yeah.
You have to inhale as well as exhale, and that works. I mean, that's what lyricism is all about.
Amazing. Because here's a few quotes I'd love for you to just react to in regards to silence. Thelonious Monk: "Silence is the loudest sound in the universe."
That sounds like Thelonious Monk. He also said right is wrong.
Right is wrong. I've never heard that. That's a good one.
So it's how we learn. We find ourselves in. Like Coltrane had some variation on that too, where he said, there's nothing wrong. You just have to think, oh no, it was Miles. He said there's nothing wrong. You just have to know how to integrate it into where you are.
And how to integrate it. Yeah. Oh, that's a huge Herbie Hancock lectures on that, like at Harvard, about how he hit a wrong note playing with Miles, and Miles gave him the evil eye and says, let's just integrate this in and make sure no one knows. But Monk said there are no wrong notes. Any comment?
Yeah, right is wrong. Yeah, but well, except for the guy John, who every note he played was like, oh, God, do I have to listen to this?
Yeah. This is a great artist. We. For me, silence is music. Is it something different than music, or is it music?
Well, I mean, that's that whole thing that John Cage, 433 is all about.
Yeah.
And, it was really radical when he put it out there, but it became integrated into the canon or lexicon of music, is that, what happens in between the notes is every bit as important as what the notes are doing. And he just stretched it out to 4 minutes and 33 seconds. And
yeah,
on every performance of that is different, because it's either the heater is cricking, or an airplane flies over, or somebody's got a growling stomach, or whatever you hearing that brackets. And he made that point.
Here's one more silence quote, Michael. Thomas Carlyle: speech is of time, silence is of eternity.
Oh, that's kind of interesting. Yeah. The pauses in between words are the things that, essentially create the suspense of communication.
Yeah.
So I could say that same sentence over again and direct your sentiment in a different way just by the pauses that I put into it. So I guess you could say that's what you're dragging along, is the eternities between the sounds.
Yeah, and talk about eternity. Here's the question, Michael: can you forget to die?
I haven't tried that yet. Yeah. It was interesting, because I've presided over the passing of my mother and my father and my brother, my eldest brother, and that transition was different every single time. And I think probably most dramatically was my father, who he was in a hospital, he'd been on this kind of glide path for about 9 days, and the last coherent sentence he said to me is, I'm a tired old man. I just want to be with Marion. His wife had died a few weeks before, and my mom. And anyway, so we were attending his passage, and my brothers were there, and my brother's fiance was there. So the four of us were all kind of at 4 points of my father's bed, and when he crossed over, my brother Paul and I both like, whoa, did you see that? And both of us saw the water of around the island on which he was born, and was just, as clear as a bell. Both saw. And then what I saw, which I don't think he saw, because we would have definitely, was this really deep crimson heart with white wings blasting through storm clouds. And it was like, oh my God, So,
but this is a hallucination in your mind's eye, or visually in front of you, you both shared a kind of vision?
it was a type of seeing that probably the Garo would have a way of explaining, but it's not explainable with our
Not explainable. Yeah.
But it was very real, very graphic, and
Yeah.
what alerted me to the fact that it was so real was the fact my brother Paul and I both perceived the ocean around the island that my father grew up on.
Yeah. Amazing. What do you think the motive of the cave artist was? The cave dancers, the cave musicians. What was their motive? Your hunch or guess?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because a lot of those cave paintings are in really obscure places. They're hard to reach. They're up high. And I'm trying to remember the guy's name. He's an interesting architectural acoustics guy. And he insisted that the the paintings were, I wouldn't say insisted, he was his speculated or whatever, that the paintings were put in why they were in odd places. You'd see a herd of horses running, that if you clapped your hands or made noise or whatever, you would hear the echo that would sound like horse hooves. And his dug into it deeper and said that the paintings were not on the rocks. They were paintings of what was in the rocks. There was that world, and this is something that the Aboriginals talk about in terms of the song lines, is that what they are, what we inhabit right now is in the corporal world, but it is not what's really going on in the world below us. That we're just basically tracing that with our life, and at some point in time we'll submerge back into it, much like the cosmic beings they had that created the landscapes around them. The stories they have about the the honey ant or the lizard, submerging, creating this upheaval with geological upheaval, and then submerging into the ground again. So that's the way they perceive their surroundings. And so those cave paintings, I have not seen a lot in my life. There was some cave paintings above Santa Barbara, painted by the Chumash people probably, or the early. And they're interesting, very ambiguous cave paintings down that the Kadakman had painted many, many years ago, before the series and other people who now, the native people there, they call them the giants, kind of like the giants that they have in Hawaii. There was these giants that inhabited the place, and they said that the giants painted these things, and they're really high up, but they're very enigmatical. They kind of look a little bit like animals, but they also look like maps. They do have some representational stuff that is, well, that's clearly a two-legged person of some sort, but are those horns on his head, or is that a hat? There are some representations, but there's also a lot of very kind of ambiguous shapes that look like kind of, they could be centipedes or checkerboards. So
Wow, Michael, that's heavy. I've never heard that. I really want to investigate that more because two things came up in my mind. One is just the term man in the moon, that humans put just the visual of the face they're seeing, but then they say, oh, the man is in the moon. So that's the last pages of Finnegan's Wake by James Joyce. The female protagonist becomes the ocean.
yeah,
She's not a woman, she's an ocean.
yeah,
You know?
yeah. The man on the moon is interesting. In Japan, it's the rabbit, and
Oh, really?
if you go below the equator, you can see the moon slightly turned, and you can see the rabbit. And if you turn your head a little bit, you can see the rabbit in the moon.
Yeah. Oh, good. I'm going to look that up too. What's
Yeah.
more important, conviction or compromise?
Oh, conviction. I mean, listen, circumstantially, if I'm in a relationship and I want to move it ahead, then it's all about compromise. But in terms of my own comportment, in terms of me getting what I want to get done, I don't want to compromise. But in relationship with others, it flips it, I guess.
Yeah.
You want
In your accomplishments, you've accomplished a lot. In your accomplishments, how do you rate these three elements, luck, skill, and ambition? What played the biggest role, second and third?
certainly not luck for me. I can tell you stories of my whole family is, yeah. So uh, skill and ambition in that order. Yeah, I mean, luck is I could tell you stories of real estate investments that my dad make you cry, just that type of stuff. Just bad luck. We're in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong people.
Yeah.
But I'm constantly trying to hone my skills, and yeah, and what was it, conviction or perseverance? What did you do?
No, that's funny. You're the three I offer are luck, skill, and ambition, but many people add other ones. Perseverance was just added the other day. Persistence, destiny, purpose,
Yeah.
energy, desire. It's endless, but I picked those three. But I used to ask this question: your observations of humans in general, is ambition based more on fear or more on joy?
Well, I don't think it's a dichotomous question. I mean, some people are really ambitious for joyless reasons.
Yeah,
I mean, talk about the fear that's driving the people who are destroying our country right now.
yeah,
They're doing that out of fear. They're
yeah,
not doing that out of love. And I mean, that's one of the things that we need to. I wouldn't even say counter that. We need to basically create a habitat and environment of compassion and love, which will
yeah,
attract people. It's not a matter of a reaction to this. These guys are fear. They're just completely drenched in fear.
yeah. Um, T.S. Eliot said poetry is outing your inner dialogue. What language is your inner dialogue in?
Oh, music.
Wow.
Yeah, because
Two,
I just, I mean, I maybe I'm too literal. I get to hear occasionally good poetry, which moves me, but most of the time, I just don't think of words that way. I
yeah.
mean, it's like it's cryptic to me, and there's some people who are really good with it, but I've never really, catered to that, or because it just, I guess I'm too literal. Spit
Well,
it
it's
out.
funny. The guy right up in your area, Gary Snyder, the only beat poet who hasn't died, he's a nature poet, really. He
Yeah,
said poetry, the task of the poet is to see the world without language and then put that seeing into language.
yeah. Well, he's one of the people who's exceptionally good at it. So
Yeah.
does he live in Bolinas now? Where does he live?
I'm not sure. I think he's up there somewhere in the
Yeah, I didn't realize it's still around. He for a while when I lived in Claremont, he taught at Pomona College. He had
yeah.
a chair there for a while.
Well, Michael, two of my film heroes have this mantra. George Manupelli, there is no, ignore yourself. Jonas Mekas says there is no self-expression. And Cecil Taylor says, I'm just a vehicle and this stuff just comes through me. Is art making, music making more self-expression or more you're a vehicle for whatever technologies, cultures, and environments are dominant?
Uh, I'm again. It's in terms of my thing. I definitely practice. I definitely try to get tunes down. I try to get together, but I was a really lousy classical player for a number of reasons, but one of them was that I could not follow the same path twice, and so when I'm playing tunes that I've been playing, that I wrote, that I've been playing all my life, I never play it the same.
Yeah.
It always is slightly different, and that was my worry back when I was playing this piece I'd never played before. I'm going, am I situated in such a way that I can actually pull this off? But yeah, but some people, I mean, I marvel at the way that some people can just really wickedly remember a tune on their instrument and just play it without having any cues in front of them, any music in front of them. They just know it so well, and they play it the same way every time. I guess the thing that would make it different would be, the audience, the interaction with the audience, and what mood they're in. It would be interesting to hear, the version of "Sympathy with the Devil" that the Stones sang at Altamont, and I think it was one of the last tunes that they did, and the same tune sung at Woodstock.
Yeah.
And just the recordings of the two, and see if the textures are noticeably different. I suspect they would be.
Yeah. Can art making, music making be egoless?
Well, I guess in terms of, it can be. Oh yeah, that you're asking me, can be. Is it? Is it often that way? I mean, one of the things that makes, pop stars like Taylor Swift, um, is that she's so her. She's so her that um, she's constructed this, this temple of Taylor Swift, and
Yeah.
that's why she's so successful. So, is that her ego? I would suspect you could say that. Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, it's
Like,
amazing.
Michael, tell me one major element of your creative output, who Michael is, that's changed, in one major element that stayed the same in the years you've been doing this. Writing, nature conservation, in music. What's one major element same, one major element that's changed?
Well, with music, I at least gotten more talented at it. I'm starting to get the hang of it finally. But I mean, it was interesting with the music, and this is just maybe it's a tangent here, but when COVID happened, what I should have done is I should have woodshedded and just really just done my scales and arpeggios and whatever. I went there for a couple of years where I hardly played at all because it was the landscape of my interior emotional being, and it was not something I wanted to tussle with. And that's why I'm sorry I didn't just get down to rudiments, but I just didn't want to play. But what's changed as a result of that, now I'm getting back into playing again, is that I'm able to reharmonize. The voicings are different, and there's other things that I'm discovering about my playing that 2-year hiatus allowed to change, allowed to happen. I still haven't discovered it all because I'm just getting back into it the last month or two. But it was I having to worry about the inner landscape and facing that every time I sat at the piano was like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to be here. But in terms of the writing stuff, I didn't write for the longest time. I mean, I wrote contracts and stuff. So I really, when I was a contractor, one of the things that reasons I win the contracts is because I didn't just have a clipboard with this is what we're going to do, check mark type of thing. I wrote a very clear narrative. This is what the job is. This is how we're going to execute it. This is to me the cost of each of these things. And so the people who wrote the checks would see this and they go, okay, I understand this. And it was, after the first year of getting my contractor's license, I was getting all the contracts because the people who wrote the checks knew what they're getting. And they didn't know what they're getting with other people. So I became very, a technical writer that way. But I didn't realize that I could write. It was a longer story until I was had a slow period. And I said, well, what I really want to do is get people to understand what I'm trying to. I was doing architectural acoustics, and my premise is that you sense what you started this conversation at earlier when you said we inhabit the architecture we're in, and so make that architecture hold us well. We have to appeal to the senses, and so there was a vocabulary that, in particular with architectural acoustics, that people weren't considering. And so I was doing a lot of work in museums. And so, what is the intent of this enclosure here? What are we doing with it? And so I had a vocabulary which had worked, but nobody could really quite understand it. So I said, well, I should just write a article about this and publish an article, and people get an idea. And I wrote an article and I submitted it to like 10 different museums, international and American Museum magazine, just different periodicals for that. And 7 of the 10 periodicals wanted the article, wanted it. And I said, well, that's pretty good. I guess I can write. And so I sold the article. I sold another one that was similar to that. And then I said, well, what I should really do is, explore this lexicon a little bit deeper. And in 3 days, I had 50 pages. It's like, oh, what happened there? So I was writing about something that I cared about as opposed to writing a narrative about what I was going to be delivering. And that it eventually became my book.
Amazing. That's
So
yeah.
that
No, I welcome any tangents like that. That you pulled it full circle to the beginning so beautifully. So this goes along with it, Michael. Moshe Feldenkrais works with healing and movement. He says it's literally possible to identify a weakness and incorporate it to become a strength, rather than we're normally taught to overcome a weakness. Tell me a weakness you turned into a strength.
wow, hard to say. God, that's an interesting question. I don't. Um, yeah, I mean, having to face my weaknesses. That's a humility thing. I've got a lot of them, and but I'm constantly trying to navigate through that. And I've lived these 69 years now, and haven't not too bruised up. Um, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's an interesting. Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, I when I was a youngster, I lived in the mountains for uh, a couple of years as a hermit, and that was interesting because um, I would go for weeks at a time without having any contact with people and having any reason to talk. I read a lot, but I didn't talk. And so when I came down into the valley to do my laundry and buy food and make some money and stuff like that, it took me a couple of days to learn how to talk to people again because uh, there was so much energetics that I was sensitized to by not when I'm amongst people. It was like, oh my God. Um, but was that a weakness? I don't know. I mean, I I don't know if I could do that anymore. I don't think I could go and live as a hermit for weeks at a time.
That's a friend of mine goes on those retreats where you can't talk for a week. He says everybody freaks out. McLuhan's had a great line. He says, "Word is the most addicting and universal drug." But I mean,
Yeah,
you were feeding yourself with printed word, but not so much exchanging spoken word with other people. But
yeah. There's an energetics behind that. I mean, I can suck up books, and it's not an energetic. Literally, when I came down, I could see people's, their energy fields. I could see the colors.
wow,
It was really amazing, and it took, yeah, it was pretty wild. And when I finally did have to move out of that situation, it took me a while. In order to temper that, I got really scientific. I really submerged into very factual, scientific um, engagement with my surroundings, and I did that for 10 years or so. And I finally ran into this woman, the woman who I met, who taught me about the Quero people. She had been studying with them as a shaman for a couple of years, and we needed each other. I needed to ground her because she was a space kaduki, and she needed to pull me out of out of my linear head. And it was a very tempestuous relationship, but rewarding for both of us because we both got
yeah.
it was, yeah. I mean, she
Michael,
and
when you spell Cato, how is that? Kato? Cato people?
Quero,
Ha-
Q-ERO.
Q.
No, just Q-ERO. Quero.
Oh, I'm sorry. I got it. Q-ERO. Thank
Yeah.
you so much. I definitely want to look into that. So fill in the blank. Anger can be a productive emotion when.
When it's focused.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you got anger. My dad had a very bad anger management issue. He was like a 2.5-year-old kid, And there's times where I wish I could do that. I could just gonna collapse on the ground and scream and kick my feet, but it's not an adult thing to do. I
Yeah.
wish I could, but but there's times. God, I'm trying to remember this incident that was like that. Somebody was basically trying to corner me, and I'm trying to remember what the story was. But it was focused anger. It was like, this is not about this part of the exchange. It's about your, and so I was really firm and very well defined boundaries. And I used anger to do that. It's like, and that's the best anger to have, is the one that has a boundary to it. It's like, okay, we're fine until you get to this boundary. And then inside of that, you're going to have the dragon will bite you up. It'll take your head off.
Yeah. Well, there's a line that goes, you create what you resist. Bob Goldthwait, the comedian, morphed it into, you are what you hate. James Joyce said, it's a curious thing how your mind is super saturated with the religion in which you say you disbelieve. And Louis Buñuel nailed it. He said, thank God I'm an atheist. So I was curious your thoughts. You create what you resist, not you, but the idea that one creates what one resists. Any thoughts on that line?
Well, it's certainly an interplay between will and will, which will essentially create, whether it's an obstacle or whether it's, well, you're saying what resist. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of ways of saying it. I mean, I think that the Protestant way of saying that is that, no pain, no gain. It's a very Protestant thing to say, but I wouldn't go that far.
Yeah.
But
these are five. Go ahead.
I just having obstacles to overcome is a way that we definitely build up our strengths.
Yeah, that's what I learned from studying McLuhan, translating The Wake by Joyce, is how do you turn a breakdown into a breakthrough? How do you turn a rejection into a redirection? So these are 5 quick Alan Watts questions off the top of your head in a couple words. 1, who started it all?
Well, I can either say creator, but I would say to resist the idea of putting that in as I met this guy who was a Moa, and he said, who is this man, Jesus Christ? He was not a Norwegian. We tend to create these gods that somehow reflect our own. And so when I say creator, it's, I was afraid to say that when I first started getting into Native American spiritual practices, because it was so easy to think of somebody who had two eyes, a nose, and a mouth. And it's an energy.
That energy is good, but this is, Michael, this is funny you said that, because when they asked Harold Bloom, do you believe in God? And he says, my attitude towards Yahweh is that I don't like him and I don't trust him and I wish he'd go away, but I know he won't because he's built into our language. As Nietzsche says, he's part of the way we think. As soon as we use a verb involving being, we're in trouble.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So
the second Alan Watts is, are we going to make it?
Oh yeah.
3, where do we put it?
It's here.
Beautiful. I never had that answer. It's here. Who's cleaning it up?
The images come to mind. If who was it? Who had the Paul Krasner?
Oh my God! I was going to quote Krasner earlier. What did he say?
Well, I mean, I just get this image of Krasner kind of at the end of a parade. There's a guy there sweeping up the horse shit.
Right.
Yeah, he had this and in what was the name of that magazine he published for a long time?
The Realist.
The Realist, right? And my brother Lee had a whole bundle of those. He took that. Anyways, there was that long running cartoon of somebody who was basically had half run over by a steamroller, and they were interviewing they're interviewing this person. Oh, how do you feel? A little depressed, you know. Yeah.
I loved Krasner. I asked him all these questions about 5 different times. And one time he was sitting right in this chair, and his wife was an amazing woman. Nancy was next to him. And every question I'd ask him, he would laugh. And then he would turn to Nancy and go, how should I answer that? And then she'd go, say this. And he'd go, I'm not going to say that. But, you know, earlier when you were talking about your dad, and you know, we were talking about death. One of my favorite Krasner lines of all times is, I only believe in reincarnation in one of my past lives.
Yeah, that's a Krasner. There was a Peter, Paul, and Harry show. You know?
Oh yeah, I know that. That was a great show.
Yeah, that was great. And these guys just off the cuff, you know, they were really.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Peter, that's you know, who worked with Peter Bergman. I know Phil Proctor well. He's a great, still living, hanging in there. And Harry Shearer is, you're talking about Harry Shearer? Is that the bass player for Spinal Tap? My favorite line from him is, they're about to release Spinal Tap 2. Oh my God. And when they did the test screening for Spinal Tap, someone wrote on the card, good movie, but you should have got a better rock band.
Yeah.
Okay, here's the 5th Alan Watts question, Michael. Is it serious?
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, I'd say no, because you know we're not going to get out of this alive, and the seriosity of the thing is what raises our cortisol levels. So we got to keep some humor in it. But sometimes, you know, I mean, we're in a pickle right now, and I would call that really serious. We have people who want to destroy the entire United States and paw through it and sell the good parts to their pals. You know, it's serious. That is serious.
That is serious, but I'm glad you said it. I mean, Zappa said it. I'm very serious about being not serious, but it's both, you know. Okay, a few more and we're out of here. We got about 10 more minutes. I really appreciate your time. Michael, how do you find peace of mind?
Well, I'm playing music now again. That's nice.
Yeah.
You know, this is I used to be able to find it very easily just by going out in nature, but I have been watching nature change as a result of anthropogenic forces. And so sometimes, like I went on a hike last December. I live at the base of this watershed, and it's a big forest. It's all largely tan oaks and fir trees and whatever. And I used to be able to just go up that and enjoy, you know, that. But I went on this hike, a 4-hour hike, and I didn't hear any birds. None. Wow. That's creepy. That's not creepy. Yeah, that's not relaxing. So
nope. And with the fires here in LA, you can't swim in the ocean. The ocean's a mess right now, and I know that's something you've. Then you know, I was going to go. I know we went into it in part 1 a little, and we haven't much in part 2. But I was going to ask you, do you know Paul Watson, who founded Greenpeace?
Yeah.
Do you know? I mean, the way they're treating him right now, and he said something. I'm not sure what show it was. It could have been on Carolyn Casey's show. He said, "Don't ever eat any fish." And I'm like, wow. And you know, I want to believe him, but you know that situation. Do you eat fish? And is that a warning we should definitely uphold?
Well, I mean, it depends on the fish. What I would suggest is going down on the trophic level, so eating sardines and anchovies, is one thing. Eating, large tuna is another. They aggregate mercury. They aggregate some of the toxins. And I heard this tale of a guy who lived down in Santa Cruz, a friend of a friend or somebody I didn't meet myself, but he would love tuna fish, and he would eat like a can or two of tuna a day.
Yeah.
And he was leaving his house to go and do something, and he said, "What am I going? Where am I going? What am I?" And he realized that he had aggregated mercury, and it was starting to affect his thinking.
Yeah.
From all the tuna he was eating. So, yeah, I mean, we've really made a mess of the ocean. That's true. Yeah, some fish I wouldn't eat. I'm also starting to realize that some fish are sentient in a way that I don't condone killing. I was skin diving not too long ago, and I was playing with this damselfish, and wanted to play. This is a little fish this big, and it wanted to goof off with me. It's like, I don't want to kill that guy.
Oh God.
Sweetie,
What a story.
Yeah.
That's the
So,
amazing thing.
yeah.
When animals are biting at each other, they're playing, they ain't hurting each other. It looks like they might be hurting each other.
Yeah, well, I mean, that play is a universal language.
Yeah.
And so all animals do that. And humans do in our better terms. But yeah. But he was talking about the toxicity of fish, right?
Yeah.
Paul? Yeah. Paul's an interesting guy. So is he still imprisoned?
Oh my God. I haven't followed it, but I mean, basically, the Japanese government is just hurting him because he made a movie. I mean, he does these things, but they don't like what his movie did. What I understand, I don't know all the details. I was just always impressed because he would always say he learned a lot from studying McLuhan. So I was like, yeah, there Paul Watson learned from him. And then Abby Hoffman said, he learned a lot from McLuhan. But anyways, if you were walking down the street I wanted to ask this one first. Utah Phillips said, anarchy is making rules for yourself and not other people. Who's entitled to make the rules?
Well, anarchy requires a certain sense of responsibility too. And and self-regulation is hard. I learned, because I used to manage, large groups of people doing installation work and stuff. And I found that like 1 out of 10 people can take responsibility, and then 9 out of 10 don't want to. And so those 9 out of 10, they would rather somebody else make the decisions, and so they follow them. And that's, one of the problems that we're having right now is that, there's a lot of people who see firm decisions being made, and they say, well, at least that person is making decisions, and so if I follow them, I won't fail.
Yeah.
And if it does fail, it's his fault, not my fault. But it's a problem. We've got a huge problem with this because, I wish everybody had the presence of mind to be self-regulating, but that doesn't seem to work. And for all kinds of reasons, I mean, we're wounded. I mean, we talked briefly about the why are white guys so mean in the last episode. Yeah. And I finished that essay finally. Maybe I'll send it to you if you're interested. But we're wounded. We all have wounds that perpetrate themselves down through our DNA. It's inherited, and until we really unpack that, one of the beautiful stories, the Sumerian story of Inanna. She had to go into the underworld to fetch her sister, and as she submerged further and further into it, she had to give up more and more, to the point where at the very bottom of this, she is flayed and hanging on a meat hook, and she has to reassemble herself to come back. And when she does, she's a whole person. More than a whole person. She's a whole person, much more than she was when she went in to retrieve her sister. So no, this is a 4,000-year-old story. It's an amazing, amazing story, and it's from that story, Persephone and or the the whole kind of going down, Orestes going down into the underworld to rescue Persephone, and those stories echo that. But there was a shift, and I have to figure out where this happened, because Sumerian and Mesopotamian culture were matrilineal. The women were the ones who basically were deferred to, and I don't know what happened or when it happened historically, but I'm going to try to excavate and find out how that happened. I think one of the places it did happen was, when the cultures went down in Cappadocia and they were underground living there, because what was going on above was a mess. But nobody was chronicling what was going on above them. It was mean people. And so they protected themselves by living underground. And so if we could find some evidence or somebody who has a informed commentary about what was happening above the folks who were living in Cappadocia would be interesting to find out. And I think that's where the shift probably happened between the matriarchy and the patriarchy.
Yeah, that's amazing because Michael, I didn't ask you what caused matriarchy, but my friend Jim Miller has really studied this, and he's heavily into Maria Gambudis, who spawned Rian Eisler, the Chalice and the Blade. And I would love for you guys to hook up, because he could probably give you some references to the question you were just asking about. That is an amazing topic. We call it matristic civilization. you
Mm-hmm.
know and when I asked Peter Sellers, the great opera director, what caused matriarchy, he said a mother holding a baby. That amazing. Because people look at me, but what do you mean what caused it? It's like biology caused it. Women give birth.
Yeah. And I think that the precedence of that in older societies was really clear. I mean,
Yeah.
one of the things that in the Iroquois Confederacy, there's a lot of different tribes and what have you, but they would have conflicts sometimes, but they would not go to war until they conferred with the grandmothers, because the grandmothers had the most to lose.
Yeah.
And
So back to,
not worth it.
yeah, amazing. Back to anarchy just for a second. The way Utah Phillips described anarchy is making rules for yourself and not other people is the etymological breakdown of the word freedom. Freedom comes from giving oneself one's own laws. What does freedom mean to you now?
That word is so fraught. The word has been essentially usurped by the conservatives in this country to basically imply that we are all self-regulating and the might is right. This is what it's turned into. My freedom is going to usurp your freedom. They're not talking about it in terms of self-regulation. They're talking about it in terms of brute force, and so that the word is really fraught.
Yeah.
And I mean, I take it another direction to get out of the political thing. They used to call, the music of John Coltrane or Archie Shepp. They used to call it free jazz.
Yeah.
And I was free jazz because it was kind of oftentimes relieved from the 32 bar phrase, for example, and they would play. But in order to play that way, those guys, I learned later on, that Coltrane, he knew exactly what he was doing. He was just incredibly precise. So it wasn't free in the sense of just blow and maybe it'll come together.
Yeah. That's amazing. Yeah, you brought that up. That's a great parallel. And if you were, we got a few more. Oh, I wanted to ask you this: what's the difference between rights and responsibilities?
Well, responsibility is self-governed, and rights are a framework within that governance happens.
Yeah.
Rights imply other people, and responsibilities imply self.
Yeah. If you were walking down the street today and you met yourself as a 12-year-old, what would you say to your 12-year-old self?
I'm not going to say the first thing that came to my mind.
That's it. Leave it up to the imagination. I don't know what you were going to say.
Yeah. Well, I was a codependent for a long time, and engineers have a predilection to that. Let me fix that for you as an engineering codependence. So I would probably have explained that having to do with governing myself as opposed to governing myself for myself as opposed to for the other people. I was trying to make other people happy somehow, and in complex ways. And sometimes people don't want to be made happy that way. When I got older, when I was 12 years old, I was well, actually 12 years old. Jesus, I was in junior high school. I think for the most part, boys in junior high school should be put in a killer for a couple of years, and because I was a like all I had to prove a point, like all pubescent kids, I had to prove a point of some sort.
Well, I really want to read your white guys our essay when you're able to email it to me. Please let me know, or where it's published. I'd love to check it out.
I haven't. It's a weird. It's like 11,000 words, which is hard. If it was 6,000, I'd probably have an easier way of time publishing it. But 12 is like, or 11 is too much. Anyways, I'll send it to you if you have any ideas. Yeah, because it's finished.
A couple more and we're out of here, Michael. Again, I appreciate your time. What's the cultural shift you see developing today that inspires you?
What I'm seeing is in kind of response to the pressure cooker that we're in, is that people are basically appealing to their humanity. Somebody sent me this his piece that he wrote, that he said Bruce Joffe, he's retired now. He was a systems guy, but he's asking people to write letters to the editor that talk about people doing nice things, and particularly people who are marginalized right now, the DEI folks and the Mexican gardener or whatever, because the press is really doing us a disservice right now. They're carrying all this lurid stuff, and the lurid stuff is driving the luridity of it. These guys really like to be above the fold, and the more they're above the fold, the more outrageous they are. He's saying, just write letters to the editor, just have sweet stories about somebody who helped somebody else out. Somebody marginalized who actually was just a human being. And 150 words is what typically places will take, and you can get a lot done in 150 words. And so I'm seeing that, and also just in our ceremonies where people are caring about each other and caring about themselves as well. But we have to not internalize this chaos that's going on, and help where we can.
Really good words. I love it. I'm gonna tell my group that on Monday. Write sweet letters, 150 words. I mean, that's simple. In accent the positive. What's a question that remains unresolved for you?
One of these guys going to get off the pot. Unresolved question for me. Yeah, I mean, I don't really have any gnawing questions except for what's next,
Yeah. What's next is a good one. Okay. How has being Michael shaped your behavior? Meaning, how has writing music and your ocean conservative, your dedication to the ocean shaped your behavior?
Well, I'm going to get back to this gratitude thing. It's all really out of gratitude,
Yeah.
and the more the more awestruck I'm about the ocean, the relations with other people. I I write about nature. There we go.
Yeah.
Oh, we just popped it for a second. Yeah. Um, are you there still?
Yep. No, I heard you stress
Yeah,
gratitude in writing about nature. That's beautiful.
yeah, yeah. We're living in a time that's so fraught right now. We really have to be kind to ourselves and kind to others,
Yeah.
and appreciative of what we are. You go outside, and while there's things that are on the headlines which are horrible, but the sun still comes up in the east.
Dude, it's
Yeah.
amazing. I'm here in Venice, California. It's sunny and beautiful. I know. Okay, Thornton Wilder said in 1928, Michael, art is confession. Art is the secret told. But art is not only the desire to tell one's secret, it's the desire to tell it and hide it at the same time. You've laid your cards on the table for hours. I'm not insinuating you haven't already answered this. What's it really all about for you?
Well, I mean, I think I want to be whole, and I may not be whole until I'm in the hole, until I'm in my grave. But I want to be whole, and I have a busy mind, and I'd like to integrate what's around me, and I hope I don't lose my mind before I lose my body. I think that will be.
Beautiful. What gives you the most optimism?
Well, what I'm seeing of people that I know,
Yeah.
there are people who are really doing what they can. I mean, the phone call that I was on before this was, I said, Development Executives Roundtable. And we're all facing a situation now where the administration is toying with this idea of taking away our nonprofit determinations if he doesn't like what we're doing.
Yeah.
And that's so we're going to have to figure out in a Development Executives Roundtable. We're talking about people who are getting money from other people to do the good things. There was a woman who was with the Berkeley Public Library, fundraising for them, and there's people doing other types of good work just to make other people's lives better. And
Yeah.
I think that's the predilection that we all have, if we're allowed to allow it to flourish. That we want our setting, our people around us, and whatever, to all be happy.
Yeah.
Unhappy people do unhappy things, and that's what we're having to deal with right now. So yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful. Michael, the first question I asked you in part one was, what's the best thing for a human being? And Wilhelm Reich said the best thing for a human being is another human being. The last question I ask is, what gives you the most optimism? That's what they asked Groucho Marx at the end of his life. And he said, other people, which you just said, stress, seeing other people. So it's sure been amazing spending this time with another person, especially because it was you. Thank you so much, Michael. I really learned a lot. And I hope someday that we can hang out in person and jam on some free jazz together.
That would be great. Well, thanks. I really appreciate your time as well. You ask very provocative and interesting questions, and it must be fun to be able to have a whole library of experiences, all these wonderful people that you've intersected with these interesting questions.
I am so lucky, and I'm glad you've helped turn me on to some of these people, and keep sending me suggestions. And Michael, just move forward in the positive way you're doing it, because you're making the world a better place. Thank you so much. Even though I'm going to hit the end broadcast button now, I hope this never ends and we can keep talking forever and ever. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you as well. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Michael.